completed hat here. This is the medium height. There's also going to be a shorter one and a taller one if you want it really tall. It's quite easy to do. If you've never sewn any of my sheepskin patterns before, hop over to the mitten video and that will show you how I trace and get everything ready to go. However, this one, since the skin side doesn't show, you can just use a regular pen, whereas in the other video I use these fabric marking pens that can actually erase with heat. And there's some leniency to how tall you can make this. You can fold that in a little deeper or a little more shallow, and when in doubt, just make the taller version, and then you can trim it down after the fact as well. As you can see, I left a little bit of that seam open, so if you want to go back and make it a little shorter, you can just trim it down. So this hat will have just these 3 parts. I'll show you in the end an option where you can add another circle that's a little smaller to the inside if you really want it super thick. This is a great one to sew by machine if you want. However, I'm going to show how to sew it by hand in the video. And the thing to remember too is I'll have 3 different lines to where you can cut this. A shorter one, a longer one, and a real long one, depending on how high you want the hat. This is the medium one. If you're unsure, you can always just cut it at that longest one if you're not worried about wasting just a little bit of extra sheepskin, because after the hat's completed, this will fold to the inside. And you can just trim this back as far as you want. And see, the stitches only go so far. That gives you some leniency as to getting the fit just how you want. And as long as you start where stitches are on top or vice versa, and if you're sewing it by machine, you'll notice it's shorter this way than it is this way. The long is what you want to go across, so you'll sew 2 short sides together. You can sew this however you want. When the stitches are hidden, sometimes I'll just do a single loop stitch, but a lot of times with other stuff where it shows, I'll go down and back. Either way, doesn't really matter, just a personal preference. I find that with mittens and stuff, I'll go back and do that double loop stitch. I think it's just a little bit more durable. A couple clips to help you get started here. I'll just tie a knot. I'll pull that to one side. So what I'll do is the side that the knot's on, I'll go back through that hole again, because then as I sew around and loop it, it's just going to pull that knot against that hole. If I go the wrong way or leave the knot on top, it could technically twist and loosen up that last stitch. And I'll always put a little dab of glue on that knot just to make sure it doesn't come undone. Not crucial. While I'm clipping this, just keep an eye on those holes and make sure they go across and line up. If you're doing it on a machine, I suggest clipping all the way across to make sure it's lined up well. And since I came out this side, I actually want to go over, so it loops over the top. Pull good and snug. You don't want to wrench on it because you could tear the sheepskin a little bit. When you get to the end, go over 2 more times to go around the outside of that seam. And I'm going to go again to go over the top of the seam, just straight over, just to really hold those corners and everything in place. And I'll just grab that thread, tie this knot, little dab of glue, and then we'll finish this part off by sewing the other two ends together. So flip that. Can help to kind of press this out of the way first. Again, keep an eye on those holes, make sure they're lined up. This side's all sewn up like the other one. So we have that main boxing of the hat now. We're going to put the top on. You can take a look at which way the fur's flowing if you want to position this any specific way. I usually find it really doesn't matter all that much. So I'll just grab it and start wherever. You can start at any hole since it's equally spaced all the way around. There will be a little bit of easing on the pattern parts here, so as you're clipping this, you're going to need to push the top just a little bit to keep those holes lined up as you're going around this radius. You can go just a few at a time, or you can clip it all the way around before you start sewing. Then I always start by going through that hole I tied the knot in. Pull that knot up to the hole so it'll stay tight as we loop around. Finish sewing around the top. Tie knot, glue it, same as usual here. What we're going to do is flip this inside out, or right side out, I should say. And there is some leniency to where you fold this in. It can be a little more or a little less. This hat was cut out on the medium length pattern, and I'll fold it right up to that seam on the inside. And you can tack it down. You can use a double stick tape or glue or a couple stitches, whatever, or you could just leave it as is and just work the fold in from use. If you're making the shorter one, you may not want to add this. It's up to you. With the taller ones, I find adding this helps. And this is just cut from the same pattern, but I cut to the inside of those stitch marks so that it's smaller and can just fit in here. It might make it a little bit warmer too, but this stuff's already so warm. However, it fills in the hat a little bit nicer. It'll sit on your head better if you're making the taller versions, because then it gives something to sit up against the top of your head. And I just put that to the inside and have the sides kind of go over the top of it a little. You can tack it in there with a couple stitches or even a little glue or double stick tape or whatever you want. But I just have the folds and that in there without being tacked down. And it'll break in nice and can be kind of adjusted and stuff. I prefer that in there. There will be several different sizes, each of which will have those 3 lengths to pick from. Like I said, this is the medium, but you can pull the fold down a little bit or fold it up in there a little more. Just if you go too overboard, it might not sit just right, and then you'll be losing some of the fur from the inside. And what I did too is whatever one you pick from, so you can always just go with the longer one and then trim it later. I left some of that slack there so that if I wanted a little bit shorter, I can just trim it without worrying about dealing with the stitches having to be redone or anything like that.